have a message, like actually like have something of substance, right? And my
Yeah.
mom said something to me years ago. She's like, when you have something of worth to say, people will come find you. And what I was speaking about was about social justice issues. I was educating people on the Asian American experience, what we were going through, but also educating my community about cross-racial solidarity. So I actually talked a lot about Black and Asian solidarity. I talked a lot about how, especially I think it's pertinent to right now, with birthright citizenship, being debated about whether that's going to be overturned. That Asian Americans, like, we would not be here if the Hart-Celler Act wasn't passed in 1965, in large part due to the advocacy of Martin Luther King Jr. And the civil rights movement. And so, I think that's where a lot of my following came from. Was I was very kind of direct about what was going on. I wasn't trying to fluff it up. I wasn't trying to, make it worse than it really was. I think I was just being direct about this is the situation and circumstances and the plight of my people, but also offering up very clear cut and tangible solutions. Like, hey, like there's no way we're gonna stop anti-Asian hate if we're not working in solidarity with other communities. But that also means that we have to be honest with ourselves, and we have to also show up and fight for them and their rights as well.
Welcome to another episode of Everything Intellectual Property. Today, we have a very special guest with us. This person co-founded a luxury brand for Asian Americans as well as others. Please help me welcome the co-founder of 1587 Sneakers, Sam Hyun. How's it going, Sam?
How you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. I appreciate kind of you giving me some time here this afternoon to kind of talk about your guys' brand and the company that you guys started and kind of is continuously growing. I think one of the things that I always kind of like to kind of start with, just so the audience can kind of have an idea, to the extent that they're not watching the video version, but maybe are watching the audio version. Can you kind of describe the product, what it is that you guys do and sell? I'm not sure if you have some of the product with you that you can maybe show. If not, I think I can pull up your guys' website so that people can kind of take a look at that and get an idea of what it is that you guys are doing.
Yeah, so we're 1587 Sneakers. We're the very first Asian American sneaker brand. We came about because we were sick and tired of the sneaker industry continuously telling Asian Americans that we weren't worth marketing to. And when they were marketing to us, it was in very, I would say, half-hearted measures. And then it was almost like this self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Yeah.
They would not put a lot of effort, barely, make an attempt at it. And then the numbers wouldn't reflect what they were hoping for. And then they would say, see, we were right. They're not worth marketing to. They're just a follower consumer. We don't have to put an effort towards them. And so, we felt like it was time that we took a hold of the future of how you communicate and you engage with our community, and said, we're going to take it into our own hands and build this company so that hopefully we can inspire other people to be unapologetically themselves.
Right. No, that's cool. And again, we'll definitely get off into like the Shark Tank portion of it later in terms of that whole experience. But kind of pulling something that they kind of talked about on Shark Tank a number of times, I think Damon John and some others, where they talked about this kind of lifestyle brand. I guess, why is it, do you think that for whatever reason, people, and I would imagine that some of those people that you're talking to or companies are like kind of the big dog, so to speak. So why do you think that they look at like maybe the Asian American or that kind of group is like a follower? Because this is the first time I've heard like, okay, no, they're just a follower community as opposed to somebody who's kind of setting the trends and things like that. Why do you think that maybe is the case, or that was looked at it? Because at least when I think of, just the Asian community, not only here in the U.S., but outside of the U.S., that's a decent sized community. So why do you think it has that, I guess, stigma, which I kind of hesitate to call it a stigma, but at least has that kind of being a follower community?
Oh, it's definitely a stigma. We're the fastest growing racial demographic. We make up nearly 9% of the U.S. population, approximately 15 to 16% of all sneaker sales. And I think there's like approximately, we have like a $2.3 trillion, buying power. And yet people don't see us in that way, because partly due to the model minority myth, and just general racial stereotypes towards the Asian American community, that we're not leaders. There are statistics that show that Asian Americans are far more likely to be appointed or put in as a CEO when a company is headed towards bankruptcy, as opposed to if a company's on its rise up. I think just a general, anytime you see, the tropes that Asian men are weak, that we're smaller, we're, more docile. I think just all that kind of lends itself into the biases that these companies have towards the consumer, which is a huge mistake. I think, you should never underestimate anybody. You shouldn't underestimate your any consumer. And I think people are different, and just because we're Asian American doesn't mean that we all think the same, doesn't mean we all, behave the same. I mean, I think that's a huge mistake that, not just companies, but just America right now is making as a whole, is that we're just boxing people in and labeling them and saying that you are of this ethnicity or this background, so this is how you must behave, when that's not true.
Right. No, and I think that's some great points that you made, which, like I said, is still interesting to me, because as you just said that, hey, when you're talking about CEOs being put in positions, put in place, typically, like you said is more likely to be an Asian person who kind of comes in and kind of has that role. And so it's kind of interesting that kind of they have kind of that maybe stigma, so to speak. But what do you think maybe needs to be done going forward? Clearly, you guys are doing your part with 1587 sneakers, which continue to grow and kind of do big things. What would you say would be the next big hurdle in terms of, I guess, helping out for that cause, as far as, okay, the broader society not looking at the community as followers, but more so leaders, and something, a group that people can get kind of get behind, as far as, okay, setting trends and things like that? What's like the next big thing that you think needs to happen for that to happen?
I think, honestly, just engaging in the community and the culture, right? We are made up of dozens of different countries. We speak dozens of different languages, different religious backgrounds. And so you're going to find, obviously you're going to find some parallels, between some of the cultures within the Asian American community. But it's similar. Like, you'll find similar parallels between, Koreans with, I don't know, Ghanaians, or, it's like every community, there's going to be some parallels, but how do you find the nuances? You have to go and engage. You have to actively try to go in with an open heart and an open mind, and want to learn and listen to the people of what they're telling you. And so I think as a brand, if we're not listening to our consumers and we're not listening to feedback, and we're just pushing our narrative onto them, it's never going to work. But if we're listening and receiving that feedback and incorporating it into the next decisions that we make, I think that's how we're going to grow and become successful. And I think that's what we've been doing so far. And, we listen when what we found, I just had a meeting with my co-founder, and one of the things that we found is just because you're a big influencer doesn't mean that you actually push sales, doesn't mean that you actually have engagement. Yeah. We've actually had much smaller creators do much better with us, because their followers look to them as authority figures and someone who voice they trust, as opposed to, oh, I just like your content, so I'm just following you because you're handsome, or you're pretty, or you're funny. But are you actually an authority figure in a real influencer?
No, and that's interesting that you said that, because I think especially with companies or kind of brands who are kind of building from the ground up, they can still make. I know a lot of times, we look at the Nikes and Adidas and some of these big brands, but you can still have a brand that's like you said, you are an authority figure within your brand, and people look to you, and to the extent that you have products and things like that you can sell, people want to kind of rock what it is that you are putting out. And as a result of that, you can build a decent size kind of community without having to be at the size of a Nike or some of these other big companies. I think one of the ones, and maybe you are familiar with the brand Aviator, I think it is. I had kind of did a lawsuit breakdown, because it seems like they were going back and forth with maybe Adidas over kind of that logo. But it seems like, just from learning more about her situation, and I forget the founder's name, but she kind of just built up a company that does very well, and I think to the tune of maybe 9 figures, or 8 or 9 figures. So, and again, and that's out on the West Coast. It seems like she has a niche audience or a niche community. But being here, I'm in the Midwest in the state of Michigan, I've kind of never heard of that. I never heard of Aviator up until that point in time. So just being able to have a company that, okay, you have your community that are dedicated to you, like you said, look to you as an authority or authority figure, and still kind of build something that's worth millions of dollars. I don't know. I think maybe that's the wave, and I think a lot of people should kind of more so kind of look at that path. So I don't know. I thought that was interesting that you said, as far as kind of like you said, influencers. Some people just kind of follow just because they're pretty face or whatever the case may be, as opposed to some people, they have more of that juice in terms of like, man, we need to, we want to kind of buy from this guy because he's that guy or he's that girl within, I guess, within a space. Which not sure if you had any comments to that. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar, like Supreme, right? Like Supreme started off as a niche, right? Skateboard brand, and it just grew, right? Kith is another one, right? Niche, and so for us as a brand, we actually, people told us we were crazy when we said that we're a Asian American sneaker brand that was specifically cater, marketing and as an unapologetically Asian American sneaker brand. People told us we're nuts, but for me, I said, why? And the second part about it was, by being very specific about who we are, it's very easy to understand, and it differentiates us in a market that's already extremely saturated, right? Like you named, like Nike, Adidas. You have these major corporations that generate billions of sales, sneaker sales a year. How is a small, tiny little startup going to break into it, and what makes you different? Well, we are if we're the only one that is unapologetically an Asian American sneaker brand.
No, and I think kind of even going off of that, I think at the end of the day, people just want to wear dope stuff. So again, like you said, and the messaging definitely is kind of more direct. But I think you were saying, even on Shark Tank, you guys were saying that, hey, I think what, 70%, I'm not sure if that number is higher or lower, are only, I think you said only 30% of our kind of customer base are maybe Asians. Is that what you said? So I'm assuming that
those 30% are not Asian American, and so it pushes back against the narrative that if you make a brand that's specifically Asian American, that other people don't want to engage in it, and that's just like simply not true. That number is going to continue to grow as we continue to do more of our marketing and we become more of a household name. But I've had plenty of people that are not Asian American be like, you know what, I love the brand. I love, what you're building. It speaks to me. And our overall message is be unapologetically Asian American, but also like just be unapologetically you. I think people want to be accepted for who they are and are sick and tired of being told who you can be and who you can't be.
No, and I agree with that. And I think that's going to continue to get other people, like you said, the message is going to get other people to, in addition to or along with just having dope stuff, it's going to get people to buy your brand, even though they're maybe not Asians or whatever the case may be. Kind of moving on, let me ask you this, because I know you talked about having influence. We talked about maybe social media and influencers and things like that. You yourself, I think, if I'm not mistaken, at least 250,000 IG followers. How did you kind of get to that point where you built up such a following on social media, particularly IG?
TikTok is actually my largest following. On TikTok, I was posting like at one point, especially during the pandemic, like 3 to 5 videos a day. And you just have to be consistent, have a message, like actually like have something of substance, right? And my mom said something to me years ago. She's like, when you have something of worth to say, people will come find you. And what I was speaking about was about social justice issues. I was educating people on the Asian American experience, what we were going through, but also educating my community about cross-racial solidarity. So I actually talked a lot about Black and Asian solidarity. I talked a lot about how, especially I think it's pertinent to right now, with birthright citizenship, being debated about whether that's going to be overturned, that Asian Americans, like, we would not be here if the Hart-Celler Act wasn't passed in 1965, in large part due to the advocacy of Martin Luther King Jr. And the civil rights movement. And so, I think that's where a lot of my following came from. Was I was very kind of direct about what was going on. I wasn't trying to fluff it up. I wasn't trying to make it worse than it really was. I think I was just being direct about, this is the situation and circumstances and the plight of my people, but also offering up very clear cut and tangible solutions. Like, hey, like, there's no way we're gonna stop anti-Asian hate if we're not working in solidarity with other communities. But that also means that we have to be honest with ourselves, and we have to also show up and fight for them and their rights as well. and do this together.
No, and that's actually pretty cool. And like I said, I definitely agree with everything that you just said. So then let me ask you this. So, because I'm curious from this. So then having that kind of following on social media with kind of IG and TikTok and things like that, what's been the biggest challenge, if any, to be able to kind of convert them to, okay, now I'm doing this new thing with 1587 sneakers and the company and the brand and things like that? Because like you said, somebody picking up a lot of people on something else, that being the kind of social justice and things like that, it seems like a lot of times it maybe not always translate to something else that you're doing, in this case 1587 sneakers. So how kind of have you kind of dealt with that balance, or maybe those challenges, to try to get those people to go over to this other thing that you're doing and get down with that? Because the messaging is still there.
I think that's the key, right? Is it's not misaligned. It's different, but the mission and the core of like what I'm trying to accomplish, the mission is aligned. And I think that's where people can see that parallel. And so you saw people, it wasn't like some grift that I was like dropping like a meme coin. I wasn't trying to do like a rug and pull, right? So I think that is what allowed that transition to be able to happen. And I think a lot of people knowing that like what I'm trying to do, they can see it, even though it's not exactly, like for like, and not the traditional pathway that someone would veer off into. But I think because of our mission and what we're trying to accomplish at 1587, I think that's why the translation was smoother than it would have been otherwise.
Nice. So then let me ask you this, and you had talked about it on Shark Tank a little bit, and obviously coming from where I came from, kind of grew up, father passed away early on, so then it was just my mom and kind of siblings, and we're growing up, single parent, that type of a thing. And I guess I'm kind of laying that out is because something that you said on Shark Tank as far as the American dream, and I've talked to people who are in different countries here, different countries in Europe, and well as other kind of parts of the world, and they kind of talk about how kind of America or the United States is like kind of, where you want to at least sell the product at, because that's kind of the biggest market, that's the best market. And we hear a lot internally or domestically about the American dream, and for whatever reason, I think people don't hear that are born here kind of take it for granted a little bit more in terms of the work ethic and putting in the work to kind of have something. I know you talked a little bit about it, the American dream on Shark Tank and things like that. Do you believe, two-part question, number one, do people outside of the U.S. still look at the U.S. as being, or coming to the U.S. as far as being able to accomplish the American dream? And to that extent, do you think that just because you got the best of both worlds where you're here, but then you also go abroad and kind of experience different cultures abroad. So do you think, number one, people still abroad look at, okay, the American dream and still being able to kind of accomplish that, or wanting to come to America to accomplish the American dream? Do you think that Americans kind of take that for granted, who are born here and raised here, take it for granted? Because you see a lot of groups who kind of, maybe come here and work hard, and next thing you know, they are doing well for themselves. And I just feel like, at least me personally, Americans who are born and raised here maybe kind of take that for granted for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think it's a multi-layered response. I think they're definitely like non-American, like people outside of the country definitely see America as a land of opportunity still. I think a lot of that luster has started to wear off a little bit. I think the kind of anti-immigrant nationalist approach that is being taken, I think, gives a lot of pause to people, and also in terms of the signaling that the America is no longer going to be as enthusiastic of a trade partner, and so I think some of that is impacting the way that people see the country and in terms of opportunity. But also on the flip side, I also agree with you that I think a lot of Americans take the opportunities that we have here for granted. The ability to be able to exercise free speech, the ability to be able to go from a impoverished family, and in one generation be able to change the entire financial and economic outlook of your family, is only possible in a handful of countries, if that, right? And I don't think people quite understand the challenges that happen in other countries. And then also I hear all the time people pointing to like Sweden and like kind of the Nordic countries, but those are extremely homogenous cultures, and they all view themselves as one people because of it, as opposed to in America, where we have so many different nuances in terms of the way we see each other. the systems of oppression that still exist in this country, the barriers of entry that still exist in this country. But at the same time, I think it's important to acknowledge that there are people that are able to go from the child of an immigrant and in one generation be able to build a company from the ground up, and also be able to talk our shit, and say what we want and stand on business, right?
Yeah.
You can't do that in every country, and the ignorance that I hear of a lot of Americans, that it's like, oh well, they go to another country and then you get in trouble for opening your big mouth, and then they're like, wait, why did I get in trouble? I'm like, well, the rules are different in this country.
No, for sure. And I definitely agree with that, which is like, you got to kind of know just where you're going and kind of what rules apply, or maybe what rules don't apply from your home country. Again, I mean, you just see it on like Shark Tank, and I kind of see it day to day as an attorney, IP attorney, where again, people are kind of coming here, they're creating, whether it's a business, whether it's a product, they're selling it, they're kind of being able, like you said, in one generation, go from being in this impoverished state, having nothing, to all of a sudden having a ton of money and wealthy and things like that. And I don't know, I just think that I've seen it time and time again, just kind of giving my position, but I just think us as Americans who are maybe born and raised here, a lot of times they just kind of take it for granted, which I guess for whatever reason is understandable. But again, hopefully they can kind of go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think we definitely, there's a good contingent of us that takes it for granted and doesn't realize the opportunity that's right in front of us. And then there's also a contingent that also doesn't acknowledge what are the critiques of America, right? And that it's still harder as a person of color to be able to have upward mobility. I think I just saw a statistic that was like the 40 richest white Americans have more wealth than every black person in America combined. Like that's like unacceptable given the experience of Black Americans in this country, and what in terms of chattel slavery, or in terms of Jim Crow laws, in terms of the continuation of not allowing for room in like, let's say, the finance world. Like, how many Black CEOs do we have that are running hedge funds and private equity firms, and so, like, I think we can do both. I think we can both acknowledge that this country offers up a ton of opportunity, but we can also acknowledge that we have a long way to go to actually creating the equitable process that I think a lot of people want. And so the American dream is not necessarily dead. I wouldn't say that it's dead. It's just it never lived up to its full potential.
I got you. All that. Yeah, I think that's good. And again, even speaking about, like you said, I know next month, February, is Black History Month. And, typically, at least on my social medias, I kind of do this thing where you have kind of all these Black creators and inventors, and kind of that's really a month to highlight some of the things that people will never know maybe was created by an African-American person or whatnot. So because one of these things for me is just trying to get more, especially kind of African-Americans to create, to understand, hey, this IP is valuable. And, you can kind of from, I guess we already have it on like the artist side with the musicians and things like that, and kind of that being a copyright, but then just even from like inventions, patents, business brands, trademarks, we can participate on those sides of it as well, not just everybody trying to fit in this kind of hole of kind of being a artist or an entertainer and kind of trying to a musician or whatever the case may be. So kind of, I think that's a good segue into like the whole IP segment of it. When was your first introduction you guys to intellectual property, and then really the importance of intellectual property?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something, if you're creating anything, you got to be aware of, right? While this is a free country, to be able to build whatever it is that you want, that also comes with the fact that there is potential for somebody else to also build something if you don't trademark it and you don't, label it as yours. So I think it's something that's always in the back of our head. We're in the process right now of figuring out what our pathway forward is going to be. But it's something that, like, I think any responsible business owner, any responsible creative has to think about.
No, and I definitely would agree with you on that. Now, I know a lot of times, especially on like the patent side of things, which it seems like you guys don't have, that's not necessarily applicable to you at this point in time. I know a lot of times, even to get investors, they are asking, hey, do you have anything that's protectable? Do you have your IP protected? Things of that sort. I'm not sure if you guys are maybe taking investors and things like that, but do they ask you, to the extent that you are kind of have been approached by investors or kind of talk with prospective investors, do they mention the IP part of it, or that just hasn't kind of crossed your desk yet, just because of the way you guys kind of from a business standpoint decided to kind of go about things with like no investors at this point or whatnot?
Yeah, I think any responsible investor is always going to ask. And so we do get asked that. The way we explain it is that currently, in terms of our product itself,
Yep.
there's actually no need to do that. But in terms of the name rights, our logo, like that's something that we're exploring. And so that is less of a concern to them, because if it was, if we were a tech product, right, like you absolutely have to, right?
Yep. Yep.
But because we're not, and we're a fashion brand, there's less of an emphasis put on that. But it is a question that we do get asked.
No, for sure. No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I would imagine that, like you said, you guys would get asked that question. Let me kind of maybe ask you this, because I know, maybe on Shark Tank, you guys were talking about the whole with manufacturing and kind of the premium quality and things like that. And I think you guys maybe end up switching from Italy, who was doing your manufacture, to a country in Asia. Can you maybe talk a little bit about kind of the reason for that switch, and I guess the importance of having kind of good quality kind of associated with the product?
Yeah, we wanted to start in Italy because that's also that's where the premium leather is made, right? Like the best leather in the world is made in Italy. The best shoe manufacturers in terms of the artistry, the artisans are in Italy. So we want to start there. But a lot of it is also relationship based. You build your company based off the resources that are at your disposal. And also being able to understand the rules and parameters of which, different countries and different people and different companies operate. So for us, our relationships in Italy also allowed us to be able to order, manufacture smaller batches. But since we've raised the money and been earning money and making the money, we've been able to have more, to be able to have larger size purchases, which are required in Asia. Asian factories will not manufacture small batches like they would in Italy, which is much more, I think, like they'll work with more niche brands, as opposed to the factories in China are massive. And so it's not worth it for them to take on smaller clients.
Gotcha.
So we've gone to a scale where it's worth their while now.
No, and that makes sense. So let me ask you this: with being kind of at that scale where it's worth their while, do you guys kind of run into okay, you're cool and you guys are growing, but we have to kind of do with one of these big corporations, say, whether it's again a Nike or whatever the case may be? Because I guess I've heard those stories where manufacturing, kind of the big guy throws their weight around on the little guy because it can.
Yeah, you got to this is where you got to work those relationships, right? And understand the culture and the way that people do business. Like how people do business in Korea versus how they do business in China is very different, or Vietnam. And you have to like understand like the way that different cultures do business and engage with them that way. And so especially in China, where it's very top down. And so that is that possibility that a bigger brand can come in but push their weight around. But if your connection is to, the head honcho, the person calling the shots, you're able to get things done. And so we have a relationship with the person who owns the factory. So that definitely helped us a lot. It doesn't guarantee anything because it still has to make business sense for them.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think those relationships that we have are absolutely critical for us to even be able to have these opportunities.
Nice. No, that's cool. So then I guess moving on to the Shark Tank experience, what was kind of, even before you guys get on, at what point did you guys come to the conclusion to say, hey, this is the next step. This is the most logical next step in terms of, hey, getting on Shark Tank, getting our brand broadcasted in front of millions of people, to the masses. Kind of what went into that kind of determination to go on Shark Tank, or to at least apply to Shark Tank?
You got to shoot your shot, right? What did MJ say? MJ said you miss every shot you don't take. And so, my mindset has always been like, if we're not extremely confident about our brand, then how can we possibly expect anybody else to buy into who we are and what we're pitching? And so when we submitted, we're like, they're crazy if they don't take us, right? You have to have that kind of mindset and that delusion. Obviously, approach it more humble, but you got to have this confidence internally that like, we're worth it, and we're doing them a favor, and we're benefiting each other by being on the show. And so when we applied, we just said, let's just give it everything we got, and the chips will fall where the chips fall. And just do all the work and not like be entitled about it, right? Like, so when I'm saying like, we know our worth, it doesn't mean that we just do the bare minimum and just assume that we're going to be on the show. We made sure our videos were tight. We took all the feedback that they gave us. When we applied, we put a lot of thought and effort into the answers that we were giving. Yeah. We made sure we buttoned up everything we need to do on our end so that when we went on that show that we weren't making a fool of ourselves. And we took nothing for granted. And so we made sure that we were paying detail to every single thing that we did. And we took pride in every action we took. And I think that was a huge reason why we were able to get on the show.
Nice. So then I guess the day of the show, the day of you guys taping, obviously you hear the stories of, hey, just because you kind of film, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to air. And or even to the extent that just because you apply, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to kind of get on. But to the extent that you do get on and kind of tape an episode, that doesn't necessarily mean that episode is going to air. So how was it in the Shark? I know you had your co-founder Sam there with you, but how was it? Was it nerve-wracking? Like, what was that actual kind of time spent in the actual tape? Because we know it's for an hour and they kind of dwindle it down to the 10 minutes that you see on TV. So can you kind of take us through that experience that day?
Yeah, if I told you it wasn't nerve-wracking, that'd be a lie. The legs were shaking a little bit, but this is the kind of approach I've always taken is you got to walk into every room knowing that you belong there. And we didn't get on that show because they didn't, because we were just nobodies. Like, we were there because they wanted us there. So, know your worth and speak your truth. And, but we also did a lot of prep work. We had some of our investors grill us as if they were the sharks. We did multiple rounds of that. We, obviously it's not the same, but you try to run through as many simulations as you can. You think about what potential questions that they might ask you. And I think that preparation, plus luck, creates opportunity. So, we felt like we did everything we could and we thought we understood that they're going to cut it how they want to cut it. So it was very intentional of us to give them answers, that could only be cut a certain way. So we tried to control the narrative of how they were going to cut that as much as we could by the answers that we gave them.
No, and that makes perfect sense. So, and again, like, kudos. I know in 2024, I think at least based on the show, guys were projected to do 500,000. So things are growing. So then that has to be a good thing to take something that was essentially nothing and then all of a sudden get it to a point where, and as you said earlier, we can kind of order more product. We can actually make money off this thing now, as opposed to being something that kind of was more or less a startup and we were just trying to figure it out at one point. You kind of sit back and try to take it all in at different points and say, man, excuse me, even though we're not maybe where we want to be, and we've came a long way over the years.
Yeah, no, you definitely sit back and you got to enjoy the moments right as they come. Obviously, you don't want to sit there and enjoy it for too long, but you got to like sit back and be like, damn, like, what people really told us that we weren't even going to make it 2 months. And here we are. We did do $500,000 in sales last year. We hit our goal. We're aiming to double that this year.
Nice.
We're aiming to, there's a bunch of different goals that we're going out for, but it was never about proving anybody wrong. It was about proving ourselves right. And I think that, that part of that comes with, enjoying and celebrating the moments and realizing that, hey, like, no matter what, like, I'm not going to let somebody else steal our joy. And success is defined so differently by everybody. So I feel like the fact that we're even here, that we even exist is a success in its own right.
No, and I definitely agree with you with that. I meant to ask you early on, was talking about the background. Was this always something that you wanted to do? I know you had kind of worked in government for, I think, 10 years and did other things before that. Did you know at some point you're going to be an entrepreneur, have your own brand and kind of selling product, or this just kind of, I don't want to say came out of nowhere, but an opportunity presented itself and it was like, okay, I have to kind of run at this opportunity. Did you always kind of think about that, or how did kind of that all come about?
Yeah, it's kind of like what I just said earlier, right? Like, preparation and luck creates opportunity. It's something I've always been into fashion. I've always wanted to have my own brand and create my own vision for something. And so in 2021, after I got named Bostonian of the Year, that's when I said in my interview that I wanted Asian Americans to be unapologetically ourselves. And that was how Adam and I, we came together. He reached out, and it just so happened that growing up, like I've always loved sneakers. I used to sketch sneakers as a kid. My favorite sneaker growing up, I had one of the T-Max. It was like the all white with the blue stripes. Like that was my all-time favorite basketball sneaker. And so I used to always just like draw like basketball sneakers. It was something that was always super cool to me. And so when I got an opportunity to do this, I was like, absolutely, let's do this. Let's run with it. And here we are.
Nice. Hey, by the way, I did have those. I had he had wore them in the All-Star game one time where he had the blue sneaker and a red sneaker. So I had bought a pair of blue sneakers and a pair of red sneakers, the T-Max. I kind of was wearing them in that way as I was playing basketball growing up. So that's cool. That's cool. So then again, let me ask you this. So how is it having like partners such as Adam? And I think you guys have maybe even one other co-founder, because I know a lot of times people try to run at this by themselves, which can be kind of overwhelming, I would imagine. But then just having those partners who you get along with that add something different, bring something different to the table, that must be I don't know, it must be a little comforting in a sense that, hey man, it's like a 2 or 3 headed monster that we're kind of going at with this thing, as opposed to just me trying to do everything by himself as a one-man band. How kind of do you appreciate that dynamic with having multiple partners with 1587 Sneakers?
Yeah, you gotta be strategic, right? Especially in the beginning where every move matters.
Yeah.
And so we complement each other in our skill set in terms of what we bring to the table. Like he has 20 years, of experience in the sneaker industry, working for Reebok, Adidas, Koyo, starting his own brand before this, versus like for myself, I bring the investors to the table, knowledge of branding, relationships with influencers, celebrities, and corporate partners. And so we just have very different skill sets. And Jose is one of the, leading, authority figures and leaders and voices of the Filipino community, of undocumented community, LGBTQ community. So like he's just someone that's highly respected, and just has unbelievable relationships. And so you bring the three of us together and we're adding to each other instead of overlapping. And then personality fits were really important. And so all of us are, no job is too big, no job is too small. All of us is like, we're in this together, and we trust each other. And I think before we even agreed to launch this brand, had very, really difficult conversations at the beginning to figure out, who were we as people, and do we have the same vision and ethos and values when we're building out this company? Because otherwise it was never going to work.
I like that. Yep. I completely agree with that. So then let me ask you, and I always like to ask the guests this, because we all know with business, particularly, it's the ups and the downs. I know a lot of times you see, especially with social media, you see the highlights of somebody's life or of a business or whatever the case may be, but it's, it's some tough times that the business has to overcome and kind of make it through at different points. So I guess with that being said, what was one of the, I guess the biggest breakthroughs that you guys had with 1587 Sneakers up until this point in time? And then on the flip side, what was one of the more challenging things or time periods that you guys had to get through, and kind of you're like, man, I'm glad we had to get through it. I'm not sure. I wasn't sure we were going to last past that point, but you guys made it through. And can you kind of share those two kind of polar opposite sides of the coin with the audience?
Yeah, so the breakthrough is definitely Katie Fang. We were on the Katie Fang show on MSNBC, and after the first 45 minutes, we did $40,000 in sales. And so the phone was just going like, lighting up like a Christmas tree. It was insane. That was when we were like, oh my God, it finally happened. And it was after months of just like, up and down that period, it was just tough. Like we were just barely getting by, barely making ends meet, rubbing pennies together, just holding on for dear life. But just that dear life we were holding on to was our conviction that we had something, and we knew, like, we just like absolutely knew we had something. So, I think Will Smith says something that's like, he must have been paraphrasing someone else, but he's like, before you actually reach the peak and actually get to the hurdle of success, there's a valley that you fall into, and you're going to be free falling, and you're going to feel like you're about to die, and you're feeling like it's, all going to come crashing to an end. But if you hold on faith and you believe in that conviction, like there's going to be that upswing that happens right before you hit the ground. And it's the people that choose to hold on to hope that actually make it, end up becoming successful, versus the people that give up on the way down. And they let go of the parachute, and then you know, they fall to their death. But I think for us, it was like we believe so much in what we're doing that we're like, we're gonna see this all the way through, and thank God for Katie.
Nice. So then on the flip side of it, what was one of maybe the more challenging things that you guys had to go through, obstacles, so to speak, and but you guys still made it through even that hurdle?
I mean, I think the obstacles are just figuring out who's our customer, right, and how to speak to them, and then, you know, figuring out and testing out different models of success, like what's going to work, what's not going to work. We, you know, at one point, like we had to roll the dice. We had X amount of money left.
Yeah.
We're not sure when we're going to air on Shark Tank, and we had to figure out, do we roll the dice and buy a bunch of inventory now, or do we, you know, put it into marketing now, or get the inventory and then turn the marketing and raise more money and just bank that we're gonna be able to raise more money and then use that money that we raised for marketing later after Shark Tank airs. And some people would have done the marketing before. We decided that it was smarter for us to have the inventory and do the marketing after. And so we rolled that dice. And if we were wrong, we'd be out of business right now, but we were right.
Well, and again, but I mean, I love those stories because, you know, a lot of people, I mean, that's a part of business. You have to make some tough decisions, some of which may kind of make it such that you're not around going forward. But, you know, to the extent that you pay off, then all is well, and you kind of not necessarily forget about it, but you can kind of pat yourself on the back, I guess. So it's always good to kind of share those experiences with the audience, to kind of let them know, to the extent that you get off into entrepreneurship, these are some of the kind of tough decisions that kind of awaits you, and kind of a good segue into entrepreneurship. What advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs? So somebody who's maybe kind of doing that double, do I get off into the game? Do I not get off into the game? They got a good idea. They maybe have a good product that they're looking to sell, but they just kind of don't know whether or not they want to kind of immerse themselves into the experience of entrepreneurship. What advice would you give to that person?
If you're not 150% convicted in what you're doing, don't even bother. You know, and on the flip side of that, if you're not so confident in yourself that you're not willing to go out and put yourself on and be vulnerable and ask people to believe in your vision, then why should I, as a consumer, buy your product? And why should I participate in the engagement of and engage with you as a founder? So I think the biggest thing is, if you're going to do it, make damn sure that you want to do it. Don't half-ass it, and make sure that you're giving it 150%, and give it everything you got.
No, I agree with that 100. Not only do I agree with that, I think that's kind of when some of the more common advice or takes that you get from kind of the guests to say, hey, man, if you're not all in, just don't waste your time, because you need to be all in when you're doing this. So I'm glad that you said that. And then I guess the last question is, and maybe more the most important question, how can people follow you? How can people purchase the product? Whether it's kind of you personally, whether it's the kind of following the 1587 Sneakers on social media. And like I said, how can people actually purchase a product as well?
For sure. If you go to 1587sneakers.com, that's our website. You get 15% off your first pair. And then you can follow us on 1587 Sneakers on Instagram, and we're working on our TikTok page, with TikTok coming back. And then for my personal, I'm at Samuel, SamuelJHyun, Samuel J Hyun, on all social media platforms. And yeah, so appreciate you asking that question.
No, nice. And I have to kind of put those links in the description of kind of the video when it comes out. Let me ask you this, because when you said TikTok, that just kind of a new question popped up, which again, part of business, right? You have to kind of adapt and adjust based on kind of things happening. So what were your guys' kind of plans? I would imagine that TikTok is a part of kind of how you guys market and whatnot. So, and I think you were saying that your largest following was on TikTok. So, you know, kind of when that kind of went away, what was that next step for you to say, okay, I have to adjust, and we're still going to be successful, but I just have to adjust. So how did you look at it personally? How did the business look at it to say, okay, these are going to be our next steps if this thing is kind of being for an indefinite period of time?
Yeah, you got to just then put your resource towards the other social media platforms, right? And be creative that way, and pivot. You can't cry over the fact that whether it's going to be here or not going to be here, like that. You can't control that. The only thing you can't control is what are the pivots you're going to make and the adjustments you make. So, really putting YouTube is amazing for consumers because it's the psychology of it. On TikTok, it's actually not that great. I think certain products do well, and they're working hard to make it better. But YouTube is like you're literally typing in a certain thing, so you're like already searching for something. And so the influencers on YouTube tend to push more product. There tends to be a higher conversion rate than there is on TikTok. But I will give TikTok credit. They are working hard to change that dynamic. The TikTok shop has changed a lot of businesses for the better. So we're excited to see that it's back, and we're excited to see how our plan unfolds on TikTok.
Nice. So yeah, like I said, just with that kind of, when you had mentioned TikTok, that kind of brought up that kind of on the fly question that I thought I'd love to get your take on. Well, audience, you heard him. He's definitely been tested, and he's came out of that each test bigger and better. Definitely go support 1587 Sneakers. Go follow him on social media. Go follow Sam. He's definitely done a lot of work. To the extent that you want to, do you still post on like the social impact, the social justice stuff? Do you still post that on your personal stuff, or is it kind of 100% about the 1587 Sneakers at this point?
No, I'm still going to speak my truth.
Nice. So yeah, hey, to the extent that social justice, you're big into that, definitely go follow him. He seems like he's definitely dropping the heat, and as he puts his truth, which again, man, I think we all need to kind of be told the truth a little more anyway these days. So audience, hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Until next time, take care.